Hey everybody, I'll show you how to construct and install a curved plywood I-beam and the camera rig that goes onto it for use in multiple position overhead videography. Stand by. Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. I am James. If you are a returning viewer, glad to have you back. If you are a new viewer, glad to have you here. If you have watched any of the videos in the past, in any of the, I think I started filming when I was on the third workspace, and this is actually shop location number 6. I have, for the most part, had one stationary camera facing me. I've had what we call the uppy cam above me, and then I have had for the most part, a singular workspace. We are now in the new shop, the last shop if I have anything to do with it, and I now have this big multi-position workspace, which actually used to be the kitchen counter in the house that we renovated and are now living in. And I was trying to come up with a way that it would be easy for me to go from one position to another. Again, we do a lot more videos than just guitar, so if I've got the stuff set up to do a tutorial on tools and the different types of attachments you can get for your angle grinder, I would like it to be very easy for me to move to this position to do whatever it is I'm doing here. Perhaps it's inlay, perhaps it is an inspection, perhaps it is a teardown, and then in this position to have yet another project going, in this case preparing to put a back on an old guitar. So the design that I came up with was just a big semicircle. And I thought that if I could mount this semicircle above this big workspace, then it would be easy for me to move the camera from one position to the other and not have to just constantly move things associated with the camera, move clamps, move tripods, move wiring, move everything in order to get to a different spot. So that's what we're going to do. We're not only going to design it, but we're also going to install it, and then you'll see it in action. So let's get to building it. So every great contraption that I know of starts with an elaborate plan. So I put on my thinking face, got out my hammer, and came out with this incredibly detailed plan that was pretty much the extent of the planning. And talking to friend of the channel, Jay, we kind of came up with the idea of just making this I-beam out of plywood. And so the first thing that you have to do is you have to sketch it out, and I didn't really have anything big enough to do that with, so I just took this thin piece of wood that I had laying around, snapped a center line on it, set a pivot point, and then set out the inner, the outer distances, and then where I was going to route the channel at for the vertical piece of the I-beam. I then drew it out. Then I made another piece to hold my router so that I could then, route it. So I used this small downward spiral bit and made multiple passes. I did the center channel first, and then the outer measurement, and then the inner measurement. 48 inches, that gives me an entire sheet, almost an entire sheet to work with. I had to come in a little bit for my pivot point, so probably a fat eighth, not very much. And then, so that gave me 8 feet side to side. And then we cut them both out. And then I took some BC grade, like some construction grade plywood in order to make the vertical member. Now the top and the bottom are 1/2 inch ply. Hello, cat. Are 1/2 inch plywood, and the vertical member, I'm just going to make that 1/4 inch. I don't come from a construction background, so people will say that it's easy to work with, it's hard to work with, it's easy to bend, it's hard to bend. I don't know the difference, so I thought that I would do a test on just dry bending it. So what I did was I took the scrap from the curved pieces, and I made those into a form, just a bending form. I spaced it so it was 6 inches from edge to edge, and much like a guitar mold, just 4 feet tall. And so I tried it, just dry bending it. Didn't go very well. Ended up getting a crack near a knot hole, and the spring back on it was pretty tremendous. So I knew that wasn't going to work. So my second plan really was to think of it like just a guitar side. And so I was going to use a combination of heat and moisture to create steam, to soften things up, and then to bend it. And so since my heating blanket is guitar sized and not big freaking camera rig sized, I had to do it in 3 different segments. And it actually worked out pretty well. I set my temperature quite low because I didn't know what the I didn't know how easy this was going to go. I didn't know if it was going to scorch, with it being, it's not rosewood, it's not mahogany, it's not the stuff that I usually use with guitars. It's softwood. I didn't know if the glue in between the layers was gonna melt, if it was gonna let go. I mean, I don't know. Never done this before, but it actually went well. I brought it up to temperature. I guess I should tell you about the sandwich first. So my bottom layer is spring steel, and then I put on my silicone heating blanket. And this is a 1,035 watt blanket. It'll make the sun think it's hot. And so I set it at 275. Then I sprayed down my section of plywood, and then I wrapped it in tin foil so that the steam that I would generate would stay in there and hopefully soak through. And then another layer of spring steel up on the top. And then I would use almost every clamp I owned, once it got up to temperature, to slowly work it down onto the form. And then I would shut the heat off, let it sit. Once it returned to room temperature, then I would turn it on again, heat it back up to 275, shut it off. Same process, let it sit till room temperature. And that way I was able to get in fairly quick succession two pieces done. The reason that I needed 2 pieces done is because I couldn't find a sheet of plywood 12 feet long, which is how long it is from one end of the circle or the rail to the other end. So I had to do it in 2 6-foot pieces. So with the 2 vertical pieces bent, I worked that inner channel to get it to fit not super tight. I tried to open it up a little bit because I didn't want to starve the joint of glue. I didn't want it so tight that when I hammered it in there, it would, squirt all the glue out of it. And that actually went fairly well. I had to use these big Jorgensen clamps just because they were tall enough and they were deep enough to get the pressure over that vertical part. And then I went ahead and I put some 1-inch ring shank nails along the spine because, well, over-engineering is fun, and that's what I tend to do. So then, once that was completed, We had to work on getting it hung, getting it to fly, and had somewhat of a challenging situation because directly over the center of my workstation there's an air conditioning duct. I shouldn't say that. There's a heating duct. It's not air conditioning, because that would be so nice. It's a heater, and so I had to drop this beam 15 inches down from the ceiling. So my elaborate plan was 2-foot sections of Superstrut lag screws into the supporting members up in the ceiling, and threaded rod, 1/4 inch 20 threaded rod. I used 4 of them to get it up into the ceiling, because I'm a one-man shop most of the time. So everything that I do, I have to try to work around one guy. What I came up with was to locate 4 places where I would drill holes, and then I would start lifting the beam up one little section at a time, and I used 2-inch pieces of insulation foam to hold it up off the workbench so that I could get the nuts started on the rod and then slowly work it up into the vertical. It went a lot faster than I thought it was going to, and as a consequence, when I got it up there, it's pretty darn solid on 4 rods. I've got places where I could add an additional 4 more. I'm just going to wait and see if it's overkill. It actually leveled out very easily. I was quite surprised. And so now with the beam up, I got to turn my attention to making the actual dolly that the camera is going to ride on. So referring to my elaborate plan we saw at the beginning, this is an underslung platform that is somehow going to roll back and forth. What I came up with was just a piece of scrap plywood from the original I-beam build, and to mount the tripod I used a piece of 1/4 inch by 1 inch aluminum bar. The original plan was to have a couple of bearings to act as a guide so that it would stay on the track. When I came to fabricate the holders for the wheels, I used that using 1/8 inch by 1 inch aluminum bar. Not being a metal worker, I just used a hammer and whacked them into shape, drilled the holes out. And the wheels came from a set of roller blades that I found at a local thrift shop for $5. The great part is I was able to use the axles that came with the wheels, and I only used one of them. So I've still got 4 more wheels for a separate build. So when I got those on, I realized that there was no need for the guide bearings because the aluminum bar that held the wheels into place was doing that job. So I just took those bearing assemblies off. Now, I left that bar long. I may use that at some future point for another type of a camera mount or something. So that actually went together fairly quickly. The holders for the wheels have a central attachment point, and that way I can tow in the wheels so that they will track in the same approximate curve as the I-beam, and they don't just want to go straight, they want to kind of follow that curve. I was able to put put a tripod head underneath there, and it mounted up, and the silly thing works. Now, my circle, or my half circle, doesn't completely go 90 degrees to each one of the stations. So what I'm going to have to come up with is there's kind of two parts to this. One, I think I'm going to get a different tripod head. I think I'm going to use a just a regular 3-axis pan tilt rotate mount instead of this ball head. And that way I can keep them a little bit loose and it's easy to adjust them. The other thing is I may just lower the entire assembly, because right now I have to get up onto a step to do that. And I just don't know when things get moving along if I'm going to want a step in the middle of my work area all the time. That could be problematic. And that's how you do it. I didn't have a lot of expenditures. I did buy the 2 sheets of plywood. All of the other wood that I used was scrap wood. A lot of the hardware that I used was sitting in my parts bins. I did end up buying the aluminum bar. I didn't even have to buy the bearings. The bearings were left over from when I rebuilt the motors in the table saw and my radial arm saw. Hello, cat. My cat's mad because I won't give him popcorn because he's got the diabetes. So there it is, an overhead multi-position camera dolly that you can use for whatever purposes. If you're watching this and you're into guitars, you're probably not thinking much of this. If you're a YouTube creator or a maker just trying to document what's going on in your area, I hope this is useful to you. I learned a lot on the build, as I always do. And if you've got something in your shop that's along different lines, because there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. Sorry. I'd love to see what you've got going on in your shop as far as how you film whatever it is that you do. YouTube community is full of people, really smart people, a lot smarter than I am, and I love to see how they come up with, the problem, solutions to the problem. How do I show people what I'm doing? Anyways, that's the build. Hey, if you found this useful, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that by going to our Patreon site. I'm James. You guys have a great weekend. Cheers.
Hey, if you like this episode of RATTLECAN Guitar Restorations, you might want to check this video out as well. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, and if you'd like to help the channel grow, consider stepping over to our Patreon page and giving that a look. Y'all have a good weekend. Cheers.